Hey, welcome back to Vintage Air TV. I'm Nate, and we're in the R&D garage. Today we're working on a 1987 Buick Grand National. We're going to be doing an install for the alternator, compressor, and power steering bracket on this Turbo 3.8 motor. We've already got this motor disassembled to where we need it to be. You can go ahead and follow along with your instructions to get to the point we're at. We're going to go over to the bench and we're going to get some parts together, and then we're going to come back and put everything on the engine. So we're going to go get our tools and get started. All right, so we're gonna pre-assemble some things onto our main bracket assembly here, like the alternator and the power steering pump, before we put them on the engine, just to make it a little bit easier to do. We're gonna start with the main assembly here and the alternator. And we're gonna use the back threaded boss on this. This is an OEM style alternator, 120 amp for these Buick Grand Nationals. This is an AC Delco. And we are going to grab our metric. It's an M10 1.5 by 25 millimeter bolt. Okay. Flip it around here. And then we're going to take our 3/8 16 by 3.5 inch bolt, and then our 1 3/4 spacer. And our nylock. Just tighten up that metric bolt on the back. Okay. Next, we'll take our power steering pump and we're going to clock this with the return line down at the bottom. And then our spacer bracket. This also doubles as an intercooler mounting bracket. If you're not using your factory intercooler, if you've relocated it, you can always either cut this arm off, or you could just use 3/4 inch spacers. We're using the intercooler in the stock location, so we're going to go ahead and use this bracket. So we set it on top. We can place it inside of the assembly. Okay. And then we'll grab our 5/16 by 3.5 inch bolts. Drop those down on the sides. And then we've got a metric. It's an M8 by 1.25 by 20 millimeter bolt, and that'll go on the top bolt hole here. Use our nylocks on the side. And then we'll tighten all these down. All right, so this is the assembly ready to go on the engine now. Since we are using a painted bracket, what we're going to go ahead and do is just run an external ground wire for these. If you've got you can either run a wire like that, or you can remove the paint off of the back of the bracket, or if you just leave it raw or something like that, you don't have to worry about it. So we're ready to put this guy on the engine. We'll go back over to the car now. Okay, so we're going to start by installing our metric stud here into this head. We're going to grab our bracket assembly here and just hang it. Okay. Put another metric M10 1.5 25 millimeter bolt into the head. Another one here in the bottom. Okay, we're going to tighten this one up a little bit and still leave it a little loose. Then we can remove the stud and replace it with our third bolt. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and tighten all three of these bolts before we move on. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to install our compressor here onto the bracket assembly. We can set it on there. We're going to be using a 5/16 4.5 inch bolt, and at this time we are going to be installing the optional radiator hose support bracket here. So we're going to go ahead and put that on the front before we put it under the bracket, and we're going to be using our 2-inch spacer. So that'll go right here. That goes on. And then our 5/16 lock nut on the back. Okay, and we'll leave that kind of loose for the moment. The next step, we're going to take our arm bracket here. Using the larger hole, we're going to install it onto the alternator with our 3/8 2 3/4 bolt. And our lock nut on the back. Then we'll take our 5/16 18 by 1 1/4 hex bolt and we'll run that through the compressor side. All right, the next step is to install the tensioner onto our bracket assembly. We're going to be using the 3/8 by 16 2 1/4 inch bolt and a 3/8 flat washer, and that'll just go into the holes here that are already drilled, and that goes into the threaded boss on the front of the bracket. And we're just going to go ahead and tighten that one up. All right, now that we've got the bracket assembly and all of our accessories mounted on the engine, I'm going to show you how to put on the belt, and then we're going to break away and install the power steering hoses, the electrical connections, and then we're going to put the intercooler and everything back in the engine so we're good to go. So to install our serpentine belt, we're just going to need a 1/2 inch ratchet or breaker bar. We're using a Gates Micro V. It's a KO 60578. So we're gonna route the belt around everything except for the power steering pump first. Okay. And then we just slip the belt over the power steering pulley. And we're good to go. Now that we've got our belt installed, I went ahead and installed our ground strap for our, comes off the bracket for our compressor and the alternator, just because we have a powder coated bracket and want to make sure we have a good ground connection. Next thing we're going to do is remove our stock power steering lines, because we're going to be replacing those with braided hoses. We do need a longer return hose here that we'll be installing, and you know, these are 30+ year old hoses, so we're going to go ahead and upgrade those. So now that we have our factory hoses off, we're going to go ahead and install our new braided hoses. We've cut the return pressure and the pressure line both at 24 inches for the braided line and then 27 inches for the 5/8 return hose. So go ahead and install our adapters. We'll secure this hose to the intercooler bracket with an 8/0 clamp when we install the intercooler. We're going to reuse our hose clamps and our protector sleeve here from the OEM hose. We're going to go ahead and install our electrical connections on the back of the alternator. Okay, now that we've got our bracket, our compressor, alternator, power steering pump, tensioner, all of our power steering lines and our alternator electrical connections hooked up, we're going to go ahead and reinstall our air box, intercooler, and charge pipes. We've got our air box here that mounts down to the frame. We're going to go ahead and get that in place. This clip goes over one of the feet. And we also have the air intake that clips on to the core support here. Get those it up. And we just have these 2 bolts that go to the frame. Reinstall our bolt and nut here for the intake, and then we'll get these tightened up. Okay, next we can drop our intercooler and charge pipes back into the engine bay here. Reconnect them to the intake and the turbo. And then we're gonna reconnect the intercooler to our bracket that comes off of the compressor assembly here. And we're also gonna use a 8L clamp to secure our power steering hose while we're doing that. It's just using the factory bolt that comes with the intercooler. Okay, then we're gonna take our 10mm ratchet and get this tightened up. Okay, so we're gonna come under the passenger side. We're gonna install this bolt in the bottom bracket that it secures the intercooler, and then we'll move up top and put the other two bolts in. So we're going to go to the passenger side on the top and install the last two remaining bolts. Okay, now that we've got our intercooler installed, we're going to go ahead and install our upper radiator hose. That's going to come off the intake right here. And then on this bracket here, we've flattened that bracket out so that it'll mount to our radiator hose support bracket here. Okay, and then we'll reconnect this side of the radiator hose once our radiator's installed after we do the condenser. We're gonna put our last charge pipe on, and then we're gonna tighten up all of our connections and reinstall our electrical connections. And this is for our fan. All right, folks, that's gonna do it for this video. We've got the compressor, alternator, power steering pump, and everything installed on the engine. We got our intercooler and charge pipes back on there. We're gonna leave the radiator off for right now because we got a little bit more work to do on this motor. So that's gonna be it for us. I'm Nate with Vintage Air TV. Y'all have a good one.
If you need any parts for your system, make sure you call our sales guys. They're very knowledgeable and can help you out. And if you have any problems with your installation, make sure you call our tech team.